So this video will consist of lots of short clips because I'm going to edit out the bits where I might be repeating myself or wasting too much time. It might be a difficult one to convey because it's not something that's really spoken about, but I'm going to do my best, and it's worth listening to and contemplating. I went to look at a job last summer. It was property not a million miles from me, probably 30 minutes away. Lots of trees were coming down. When I say lots, maybe, double figures. I don't think there was quite 20, maybe 15 or something like that. I think I priced it over $3,000. All the wood was staying. We just had to bring the trees down, chip the branches. So anyway, I didn't hear back from the guy, the homeowner. He probably thought it sounded a bit much, but ironically, we were working a couple of doors away from the $3,000 job. Some weeks after, and as it happened, another tree company rolled in to their property and started cutting trees. So when that happens, you never feel good about it. You wondered why or how you could have missed out. But anyway, obviously I kept an eye from my elevated position in the other trees that we were doing for the new client. I was keeping an eye on what was going on over there. So this other company had two workers, a truck and chipper, which is often how we work and how I'd priced that job as well to do. But from the offset, there was little indicators to me from what I was seeing and hearing that they weren't using the best of their available resources of the two men, equipment, truck and chipper. On two particular trees that I watched them working on, they had the chipper parked sort of 20 yards away. The chipper is running full blast, whether it's in use or not, on high revs. The climber is limbing, spending a couple of minutes doing some limbing. These are big heavy fir branches. They're all raining down into a big pile at the bottom of the tree, which then the ground worker moves in when it's his turn, and he does his best to clear up. He's got a mountain of big heavy limbs in front of him, which he's then got to try and separate and dissect and take to the chipper and process while the next lot comes down. So that's a prime example of kind of wasteful manpower and resources, and an inefficient way to utilize yourselves and your equipment. So if we sort of, and it's really relevant, it's where hours or days even over the course of a week or a month or a year are won and lost. So if we start with the really basic example, like let's say a pile of logs. Let's say we have a big pile of logs and they're all cut to manageable sizes, and we have to move them from point A to point B. So it's very conceivable that one person could move that pile of logs in an hour, or say 2 hours, or a whole day. You're going to move all them logs in one day, point A to point B. And then two people could move the logs from point A to point B in half a day, because it's a very basic task, and there's not really a way that the two people can complement each other or speed up each other's progress. So they're only going to be able to do it in twice the time. They're only going to be twice as quick at doing it. Now, when you look at something like a tree removal situation where you have somebody working in the tree, or 1 or 2 or 3 people working on the ground, and they're working together as a team, that same principle doesn't really translate, because collectively those 2 or 3 or whatever ground workers, let's say 2 ground workers, working together, more options become available to them. It's not the same as carrying those manageable logs from point A to point B. And a good example and an easy way to get your head around it is, imagine moving a load of furniture out of a house. Furniture comes in awkward shapes and sizes, and you've got to navigate through rooms and downstairs and out the front door. So yeah, 1 person could do all that, but 2 people could do it so much quicker because of the shapes and sizes of things that they're dealing with and the difficulty in maneuvering this stuff out and downstairs. So they may be able to do it in 1/3 of the time or 1/4 of the time than what the 1 person can actually do it in, even though there's only 2 people, 1 more person than 1 person. And that is a lot more kind of comparable to a tree work operation. I videoed a job a couple of weeks ago. You may have seen it. It was called Easy Work, where Dave and I took down a large fir tree. Now, the title was called Easy Work, but I mean, it isn't really easy work if you don't know what you're doing. But for somebody or people who are well rehearsed and conditioned and experienced to that sort of work, then from our perspective, it was like we were hardly working. It was easy work. Even though we got this big task done, it didn't feel like we'd done anything at the end of the day. So when you approach a job, there's obviously lots of different ways of taking a tree down, but you generally look at the resources and manpower, equipment and manpower that you have at hand, and sort of cater your strategy, within those means. So if you only had 1 ground worker helping you, that you might use a different, or you most likely would use a different strategy or adjust it to whatever a technique you would use if you had 2 ground workers at hand. So so in the case of our fir tree that me and Dave did, what we chose to do was to use a zip line to bring down and process all the limbs. So the tree did have wires underneath. It had a building underneath as well, or partially underneath it. So it made sense to incorporate ropes, obviously. Now we could have lowered the branches down to the bottom of the tree too, and Dave could have carried them over to the chipper. But that's kind of adding more time and activity to an effort or output, whatever you call it, on Dave's part, as compared to a zip line where it's just like watching one-way traffic going down. You're not lowering something down at the bottom of the tree and then sending the line back up, and then Dave's carrying the stuff. You know what I mean? This kind of extra manual labor involved there. There's also extra kind of skill on Dave's part required in lowering the branches down, as opposed to standing, you know, afar, just tightening up a line, and then unclipping the sling, throwing it to one side and retightening it again. It also means there's less risk on Dave's part because he stood well away from the tree, and I ain't got the worry of him standing underneath and something falling on him. So I have 10 slings at a time. Okay, so I initially sling all the branches up, and then I start cutting. So I'm cutting, Dave's holding the line, the limb slides down, Dave unclips, puts the sling to one side, and so forth and so on. So we're kind of working together and not cancelling each other out is the point. Think back to the other guys that I told you about before who were making each other redundant for long periods of time. I run out of slings when I get to number 10, at which point Dave sends the whole bunch back up. He has 10 large limbs lay out in front of him. I have another 10 large limbs to sling up. So while I'm slinging up, Dave uses that time to chip the branches that are laid out. We zip line him down, they're all laid out facing the right way. He's got nothing to do other than that. But we're making good use of our time, and we're not cancelling each other out. That's a really important point. So not every tree or situation obviously lends itself to using zip lines, though. In some cases you've got to use more conventional lowering, a rigging, or free cutting and falling or whatever. So so at this point, you know, you've got to consider, you know, if you're working together, what's an acceptable, you know, it's because I've got to do some cutting or low, or, you know, whatever. At some point one of us is gonna have to stand back and wait for the other. You know, I'm cutting, dropping stuff down, Dave's got to move in or whatever, he's got to lower something down. So, you know, at which point you've got to consider what is an acceptable amount of time to make your colleague redundant, your co-worker redundant, or co-workers, let's say there's 2 of them. So from my point of view, I'm going to try to limit my redundancy time to about a minute. So I'm going to cater or cut I'm going to, you know, limit my sections of tree that I'm sending down to Dave. I'm going to limit them to 1 minute, or, you know, a little more if so, or less if possible, you know, and then I can get back to work. What I don't want to do is cut off a huge section of tree. That's going to leave Dave with a massive mess to deal with, and I'm going to be sat there waiting for him for 5, 10, maybe even 15 minutes in some cases. But then bring another worker into the equation, and remember, like, we go back to the furniture moving analogy before, 2 people can achieve more working together on the ground because more options are available to them. They can untangle and move bigger sections, whilst before one person on his own would perhaps have to dissect them sections smaller, which is extra work. It's not he's not just moving them, he's having to dissect and untangle them all, you know, at a much slower rate because he's on his own. But then consider this, the more people, the more ground workers that are then involved, my redundancy time up there becomes less significant. So because they compensate for that, because they're collectively working together, you know, so they compensate for, you know, I can send down and deliver much bigger sections that they can efficiently deal with and maneuver because there's more hands on deck, you know, so my redundancy time becomes less of an issue. It doesn't matter if I'm waiting, you know, 5, even 10 minutes. Now, I'm not saying, you know, you should just be busy fools either, like that, you know, just find something, anything to do, and that is progressive, and that is efficiency, because it isn't. That can be a whole other can of worms if you're busy doing the wrong things or picking the wrong strategies. But I mean, it's similar, like if, you know, it works both ways as well. If the climber is if you're on the ground and you're stood up, there's 2, 3 of you stood up waiting on the climber, waiting for something to come down, then you know, for frequently and for long periods of time, then you know, you've got it wrong again. Something's badly wrong if that's what's happening, and you need to make the necessary adjustments. He has to think bigger. If you don't if this is something you've never considered before, because it's not something that gets really talked about, you know, but it's worth, you know, kind of keeping an eye on and analysing when you're on site, who is doing what, and, you know, are you all able to are you all actively hands-on throughout this job, and or are you sort of cancelling each other out, you know, with your activities? Are you making each other redundant? I mean, like, go back to the $3,000 job that I mentioned at the start, and the 2 guys who were there before us. Even though there was 2 of them there the whole day, in reality, only 1 person was ever working at one time for probably 90% of the job, because they were making each other redundant with their activities. When you've been doing the job for some time, for me, I've been doing it many years now, it's obviously easy for me to say and pick a line of attack. There may be, you know, 5 different lines of attack that which we can use on a given tree removal, but they rarely have equal outcome. You know what I mean? One usually is a lot more efficient than another. Efficiency in time and labor and effort and resources and everything else. So and this always reflects in the price as well, especially in a competitive area that I live in. You know, I can't afford to just put massive margins on, or even big margins, because I just won't get the work. The competition around here is just too fierce. So so, you know, with the experience, you go to a job and you recognize the best strategy and the best use of your manpower resources. I hope this has been useful. It's kind of been inspired by a video that I watched just yesterday. I'm not going to name the source or where I saw it. It was a rigging demo by people supposedly experts, and it was just a very, I would have renamed it "How to Make an Easy Job Really Complicated and Expensive." It was an absolute clusterfuck of rigging that they set up to, you know, perform what should have been a really easy task, and they call it progress. Fucking embarrassing, really. I might touch on it in a follow-up to this video. We'll have to just wait and see. Be very careful who you listen to, and especially if you're starting out in the game, or you've not been at it that long. Just, you know, you've got to question the people selling themselves as experts. You've got to question the credentials, you really do, because at times it's like the lunatics are running the asylum. It really is. But anyway, that's for another day. I hope this has been useful. I hope I've conveyed it in a way that you understand. I've tried my best. Thanks for watching.